The clock strikes midnight, and somewhere in this city, a man is smiling at a stranger he despises. He does not know why he smiles. His jaw simply moves, his lips simply curve. Some ancient circuitry beneath his conscious mind fires the muscles into position. Because somewhere, a long time ago, he learned that disapproval was a kind of death. And so he smiles. And so he nods. And so he says yes, when the entirety of his nervous system is screaming, "Sku, no, you have done this." Do not look away from that sentence. You have done this today, perhaps within the last hour. You have felt the tightening in your chest, the subtle contraction behind your sternum, and you overrode it. You silenced your own internal alarm system because someone else's comfort mattered more than your truth. And I want you to sit with that right now as you listen to my voice. Because what I am about to tell you, because what I am about to tell will change the way you see every single relationship in your life. Carl Jung spent his life staring into the darkest corridors of the human psyche. And he uncovered something that most people spend their entire existence avoiding. He discovered that the moment you begin shaping yourself to be liked, you begin a slow, silent execution of who you actually are. Not a metaphorical death, a real one, a psychological one. The parts of you that disagree, that rage, that want, that refuse, they do not simply go quiet. They go underground. They go into exile. And Jung had a name for that exiled territory. He called it the shadow. But before we descend into the shadow, I need you to understand the architecture of the prison you have built for yourself, brick by brick, smile by smile, compromise by compromise. Because you did not build this prison out of weakness. You built it out of genius. And that is the tragedy. Let me take you back, not to your memory, but to the memory beneath your memory. The wordless years, when you were a small, dependent creature, entirely at the mercy of larger beings who controlled your food, your warmth, your very sense of safety. In that world, you made a discovery so profound that it rewired the rest of your existence. You discovered that your face could be a tool. You discovered that the right expression, the right tone, the right performance of agreeableness could secure love, or at the very least, prevent abandonment. And so, without ever consciously choosing it, you began constructing what Jung called the persona. Picture it now. Picture it as a mask, but not a cheap costume mask you could simply remove. Picture it as something closer to a second skin, grown cell by cell over your true face, so gradually that you forgot it was ever an addition at all. This is the nature of the persona. It is not a lie you tell. It is a lie you become. It is the socially acceptable packaging of a self that the world deemed too much, too loud, too strange, too inconvenient to exist in its raw form. And here is where the trap closes its jaws. The persona is not inherently evil. Jung was clear about this. And I need you to hear it clearly too, because this is not a simple story of villains and victims. The persona is functional. It is the necessary interface between your raw, chaotic interior and the demands of a shared social world. You cannot walk into a funeral and scream your joy. You cannot walk into a boardroom and weep your grief. Some modulation, some translation of self into socially legible form is the price of admission into human civilization. This much is true. But notice the word I used, interface. A tool you pick up and put down, not a replacement for the hand that wields it. This is where you went wrong. And this is where almost every person listening to this went wrong. So do not let shame creep in. Let recognition creep in instead. Somewhere along the way, you stopped picking up the mask and putting it down. You forgot there was a face underneath it at all. The tool became the operator. The interface became the identity. And now, decades later, you stand in front of your own bathroom mirror at 2 a.m, staring into your own eyes, and a terrifying question surfaces from the depths like a shape moving beneath dark water. Who is actually in here? Feel that question. Do not rush past it the way you rush past every uncomfortable sensation in your body. Let it sit in your chest like a stone dropped into still water, and watch the ripples move outward into every corner of your life. This is the moment Jung would call you toward, and it is the moment I am calling you toward now, because there is a particular sensation that arises when the persona has fully eclipsed the self. And I suspect you already know it intimately. It does not announce itself with drama. It does not arrive as a single catastrophic collapse. It arrives quietly, the way rot arrives in wood, invisible on the surface, structurally catastrophic underneath. You can knock on a beam that looks perfectly solid and hear the hollow echo of decay inside. This is what happens to a human being who has spent years, sometimes decades, saying yes when their entire body screamed no. I want you to notice this feeling the next time it arrives, because it will arrive, probably today. It is a specific kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep repairs. It is a fatigue that lives not in your muscles, but in some deeper stratum of your being. Call it your soul. Call it your nervous system. Call it whatever framework feels true to you. It is the fatigue of constant translation, the exhausting labor of perpetually converting your authentic reaction into an acceptable performance. Every dinner where you laughed at a joke that offended you. Every meeting where you nodded at a plan you knew was flawed. Every relationship where you said, "I'm fine," while something inside you was quietly hemorrhaging. Each of these moments seems small, insignificant, a reasonable price for social cohesion. But Jung understood something that modern psychology is only now catching up to. The psyche keeps a ledger. Nothing is free. Every act of self-betrayal is logged filed, stored in the body and the unconscious, and the interest on that debt compounds silently until one day the account comes due. This is the inner rot. This is what happens when public approval becomes the architect of private identity. You stop asking, "What do I want?" You start asking, "What will they think?" And slowly, imperceptibly, the second question devours the first. Sit in one cyst until you can no longer locate your own desire beneath the rubble of everyone else's expectations. You become a mirror in a house of mirrors, reflecting reflections, with no original image left to trace back to. Let me ask you something, and I want you to actually answer it. Not perform an answer for me. Not perform an answer even for yourself. When was the last time you made a decision, a real decision, about your career, your relationships, your Tuesday afternoon, based purely on what you wanted, with zero calculation of how it would be perceived? Sit in the silence after that question. If the silence stretches uncomfortably long, that is not a failure. That is data. That is your unconscious handing you the exact information you have been avoiding for years. Jung believed that every human being carries within them a natural, instinctual compass, an internal orientation toward what is true, not vital for them specifically, not generically, not socially, but specifically, as the unrepeatable configuration of psyche that you are. And every single time you perform harmony, instead of expressing your authentic position, you do not merely disappoint another person. You commit a small act of violence against that compass. You demagnetize it, degree by degree, smile by smile, until one day you look up and realize you have no idea which direction is actually yours anymore. You only know which direction pleases the room. This is not a moral failing. Let me be exceptionally clear about that, because guilt is not the medicine here. Awareness is. You adapted because adaptation kept you safe, kept you loved, kept you fed, kept you included in a species that survives through belonging. Your people-pleasing was not weakness. It was, at some point in your history, brilliant strategy, but a strategy designed for a smaller, more dependent version of you has now metastasized into the operating system, running your entire adult life, and it is quietly bankrupting you of the one thing you can never get back: time spent as someone else. Somewhere inside you, right now, beneath the layer of you that is listening politely to this video, the way you listen politely to everything, there is another layer. Jung called it the shadow, and it is not what you think it is. It is not simply your evil twin, your hidden villain. It is everything you exiled in the name of being liked. Your rage, your unpopular opinions, your inconvenient needs, your appetite for things that do not photograph well for an audience. And that exiled territory does not disappear simply because you refuse to look at it. It waits. It waits the way water waits. Behind a dam, patient, accumulating pressure, indifferent to your schedule. And here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you, right down into the marrow. The shadow does not stay contained forever. It leaks. It seeps through the cracks of your carefully constructed persona in ways you do not consciously authorize. That sudden, disproportionate rage at your partner over a dish left in the sink. That inexplicable resentment toward a friend's success that you would never admit out loud. That slow-burning contempt for people who say no easily, who take up space without apology, who seem to move through the world without performing constant penance for their own existence. You call it jealousy. You call it a bad mood. Jung would call it something more precise. He would call it the return of the repressed. The exiled self banging on the door of your consciousness, demanding acknowledgement in the only language you have left it. Symptom, outburst, and quiet self-sabotage. I want you to notice something as you continue listening, because your body is already ahead of your mind on this. Some part of you relaxed the moment I named that resentment. Some part of you exhaled because finally, someone put language to a pattern you have felt but never dared to examine directly. That exhale is important. Let it happen fully. You do not need to explain it to anyone. You do not need to perform understanding for me the way you perform agreement for everyone else. Just let the recognition land. Now follow me deeper, because we have arrived at the center of the labyrinth, the truth Jung circled for decades in his private writings, the truth that will either liberate you or terrify you, and very often it must do both before it can do either. Every forced smile you have ever offered in the name of keeping the peace was not an act of kindness. I need you to really absorb this, because your entire self-concept may have been built on the opposite belief. You have told us you were being generous, being easy, being the bigger person. But strip away the story and look at the mechanism underneath. A forced smile is not generosity. It is a transaction. You traded a fragment of your truth for a moment of someone else's comfort, and you called the exchange rate fair because the alternative, their disappointment, their anger, their withdrawal, felt unbearable to your nervous system. But fairness implies mutual benefit. And ask yourself honestly, who actually benefited from your silence? They received a comfortable lie. You received the slow, cumulative erosion of your own credibility with yourself every time you betray your internal compass for external harmony. A very quiet, very devastating message gets encoded into your unconscious. The message is this: what I actually feel does not matter enough to be spoken. Read that again. Slower this time. What I actually feel does not matter enough to be spoken. Now, imagine that sentence repeating itself unconsciously thousands of times across years, across decades. Imagine what that sentence builds inside a person. Not peace. Never peace. It builds a hollow architecture, a beautifully decorated house with no one truly living inside it. A structure so convincing on the outside that even you, its architect, sometimes forget it is uninhabited. This is why Jung insisted that harmony purchased through self-betrayal is not harmony at all. It is armistice. It is a temporary cessation of visible conflict that does absolutely nothing to resolve the war raging beneath the surface. True harmony, the kind Jung actually respected,
can only be built on the foundation of two authentic selves meeting. Honesty created friction.
Friction in this framework is not the enemy of connection. Friction is often the very proof that real connection is occurring, because you cannot have genuine contact between two people if one of them has already vacated the premises in favor of a performance. Let your mind travel now to a specific memory. I am not going to tell you which one. Your unconscious already knows. It surfaced the instant I mentioned it. A moment when you said yes, and something inside you curled inward like paper touched by flame. Maybe it was small, a commitment you did not want to make, a boundary you did not enforce, a truth you swallowed at a dinner table, at a desk, in a bedroom, in a phone call. You still remember the exact tone of. Sit inside that memory for a moment. Not to punish yourself, but to witness it clearly, perhaps for the first time. Notice what your body did in that moment. Notice where the sensation lived: the throat, the stomach, the chest. Your body has been keeping a record this entire time, a record far more honest than your conscious mind has ever permitted itself to be. This is the cost, not a dramatic, single, catastrophic cost, but a compounding one, a quiet mortgage taken out against your own vitality, paid down in installments of smallness, agreeableness, and silence. And the terrifying arithmetic of it is this: you can spend an entire lifetime paying that mortgage and still die owing everything, because self-betrayal does not accrue equity. It only accrues distance. Distance from your desires. Distance from your rage. Distance from the raw, unpolished, occasionally unlikable truth of who you actually are beneath 40 years of careful curation. But listen closely now, because this is not a story engineered to leave you in the dark. Jung did not merely diagnose the wound. He mapped the road out of it. And the road begins with a single, deceptively simple act. Not rebellion. Not a dramatic personality overhaul. Not burning down every relationship in your life in the name of authenticity, which is simply the persona's mirror opposite. Another performance, this time for an audience that admires transgression instead of compliance. No. The road out begins with something quieter and infinitely more courageous. It begins with noticing. The next time you feel that familiar tightening in your chest, that subtle contraction that precedes a forced end smile. A reluctant yes, a swallowed truth. Pause. Just pause. You do not need to say the difficult thing immediately. You do not need to overhaul your entire life in that instant. You simply need to notice consciously in real time that a transaction is about to occur, that you are about to trade a piece of yourself for a moment of someone else's ease. That noticing, that single flicker of awareness, is the crack of light Jung spent his life trying to widen in every person who crossed his path. Because once you can see the mechanism, you are no longer entirely enslaved by it. The unconscious pattern, dragged even partially into the light of consciousness, begins to lose some fraction of its absolute control. Integration, in Jung's language, does not mean becoming your shadow, unleashing every repressed impulse onto the world without discernment. That is not liberation. That is merely swapping one form of unconsciousness for another. Integration means something far more demanding and far more rewarding. It means acknowledging that the parts of you exiled for the sake of being liked are not monsters to be destroyed, but orphaned fragments of your own wholeness, waiting to be welcomed home. It means learning to say the uncomfortable truth, not out of spite, but out of respect for your own internal compass. It means understanding that the people who can only love the performance were never actually loving you at all, and that the fear of losing them is, in the end, the fear of losing something that never fully existed. This is the high cost of being liked. Not merely lost time, not merely swallowed words, but the slow, silent erosion of the one relationship you can never outsource, never delegate, never escape, the relationship with yourself. And it is also, if you let it be, the beginning of the most important reclamation project you will ever undertake. Somewhere beneath every mask you have ever worn, your true face is still there, patiently waiting, exactly as Jung promised it would be. For the moment you finally decide to stop performing and start, however imperfectly, however awkwardly, however unlikably, telling the truth,